All right. Shalom, shalom. First and foremost, I would like to give all praise, honor, glory to Yahawah, BAHASHAM, YAHAWASHI, BAHASHAM, Rakakwadash. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone that taught us the truth, and salutations to the hopeful elect that's around the four corners of the globe. And the elect begins with 144,000. Yahawah, who the world ignorantly calls God and Jehovah. BAHASHAM is in the name. YAHAWASHI, who the world ignorantly calls Jesus Christ. The Rakakwadash, which is the Holy Spirit. I'm the brother I will with the GM at Chicago camp out here in Chicago. Come back at you, brothers and sisters of the household of faith of the Hopeful Right Select with another lesson. And Lord, and I hope this lesson be edifying through the spirit and power of Yahawah Shai. Once again, I hope this lesson is edifying. As you can see the title, where and who is he, man? Really take it from Job 9-24. And I'm going to read it real quick. And I'm going to ultimately jump into it, man, get some precepts about ultimately, hey, if this so-called white man, is not the wicked, who is? Because you have a lot of these Edomites, especially what's going on with the situation between Israel and Iran, how Benjamin not a Jew, ultimately basically put the term Amalek or Amalek upon the Ishmaelites, man, ultimately trying to run from being the Edomites, man. But it's evident that this devil is the Edomites, man. Hey, because they're going around the world, ultimately pillaging, rape, robbing, and murdering, man. That's what this devil is known for, man. Because we know that Esau's blessing is ultimately the sword. What's that? Genesis, the 27th chapter, man. And it says, by thy sword thou shalt live, man. Because you ultimately have three classifications of men. You have the sons of God, which are the Israelites. You have the sons of men, which are the other nations. You have the sons of the wicked, which are these Edomites, which is the self-proclaimed white man, man. That goes around the world, rape, robbery, and murder. And ultimately, he can't do right, man. But let's actually just jump into it real quick. I'm going to just get some precepts, just to follow up behind it. This is the book of Job 9-24. The earth is given into the hand of the wicked. He covereth the faces of the judges thereof. If not, wherein who is he? All right. I'm going to, break this whole verse down, and really touch upon, if not, wherein who is he? Right. So if it's not the so-called white man, then who is it then? Because like I mentioned before, these Edomites especially, they love to run, from being the Edomites and ultimately place that the nationality of being the Edomite upon other nations, man. Especially, with this guy, Benjamin, Netanyahu, ultimately, putting the term, Amalek upon the Ishmaelites, man, because they're ultimately trying to run, from their biblical nationality, man. But let's start back at the top. Job 9-24 says the earth is given into the hand of the wicked, right? Because ultimately what? Yahawah, BAHASHAM, YAHAWASHI has gave the world to this devil, man, for a period of time. So who's ultimately ruling, who's in that power seat today, man? Hey, Esau Edom, the self-proclaimed white race. The earth is given into the hand of the wicked. He covered the faces of the judges thereof. And right, that's exactly what this devil did when he got back into power during the Renaissance period, man. He ultimately depicted himself as the Messiah, what they would call Jesus Christ today, by ultimately painting, Cesare Borgia and putting him as the Messiah, man. The prophets, the judges, they ultimately they whitewashed, it's a term called iconoclasm, and ultimately put themselves up as the prophets and judges, man. You got that blasphemous picture of who the world will ignorantly calls God. It's a term called, what's that, the finger of God, where who they have, as depicted as God, a self-proclaimed white man, ultimately touching fingers with Adam, man, ultimately depicting, Adam and and the Most High Yahawah as so-called white man, man. And who did that? Hey, the self-proclaimed white man. Let's actually grab two real quick. I actually want to grab this. This is the book of First Maccabees 3-48. And lay open the book of the law, wherein the heathen has sought to paint the likeness of their images. All right, nobody has done that more than Esau Edom, man. They will ultimately going, during the Renaissance period when Esau got back into power. What was that, during the 1400s? They would go in ultimately paint over, the dark skinned images, and ultimately put themselves up, not even though ultimately paint over it or ultimately even recreate the image of ultimately setting themselves up as the prophets, the judges, even Yahawah, basically, changing the images of Yahawah, BAHASHAM, YAHAWASHI. Because we know YAHAWASHI is depicted as a so-called black man, man. What did they do? They ultimately like I said, it's a term called iconoclasm. You know, these devils came in, ultimately what? Repainted the images, you know, recreated the images, and ultimately what? Set themselves up as the Most High, the Son of Yahweh. And ultimately what? You know, the judges, the prophets. You know, that's what these devils have done, man. You know? Let's actually grab another one real quick. I believe it's in Malachi. Bear with me for a second. Yeah, because this is what this devil has been doing for the longest, man. Ever since this devil has gotten into power, man. You know, this devil been the wicked, man. You know, even, you know, you know, going through, you know, the Greeks, the Romans, you know, because it talks about when they put crowns upon their heads, wickedness was multiplied in the planet Earth, man. You know, hey, so it's evident that what the self-proclaimed white race, you know, are the wicked, man. You know, are the people ruling in wickedness today. You know, because what? They are the wicked. YAHAWASHI set them up as the wicked, man. Let me actually grab this real quick if I can find it. It's the book of Malachi 1. And I'm gonna start at verse 3. I'm gonna start at verse 2. I just want to start at the top. Malachi 1 and 1. The burden of the word of the Lord Yahweh to Israel by Malachi. I have loved you, saith the Lord, yet ye say, wherein hast thou loved us? Was not Esau Jacob's brother, saith the Lord? Yet I have loved Jacob, and I hated Esau. Hey, going back to Romans 9, man. The Lord made one for honor and one for dishonor. Hey, what is the one for honor? Hey, Jacob, you know, the Israelites, who was the one made for dishonor, man? Hey, the Edomites, you know, the self-proclaimed white race. You know, the Lord, you know, made a righteous nation, and the Lord made a wicked nation. Verse 3 says, and I hated Esau and laid his mountain, his heritage waste for the dragons of the wilderness. Whereas Edom said, we are impoverished, but we will return and build the desolate places. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, they shall build, but I will throw down, and they shall call them the border of wickedness, and the people against whom the Lord Yahweh have indignation forever. Right. They shall call them the border of wickedness, man. Because wherever this devil go, he spreads his philosophies. You know, he goes around, you know, pillaging, you know, rape, robber, and murdering these different lands. As I mentioned before, spreading these for different, you know, philosophies upon these different nations, man. And ultimately, when this devil got back into power, you know, during a Renaissance period, you know, just to back up, you know, and at Job 9:24, he covered the faces of the judges thereof. Hey, what ended up happening, man? Like I mentioned before, you know, just to follow up with that First Maccabees 3:48, in which I just read, man. You know, this devil ultimately went in and changed the dark skin images, you know, of the judges, you know, the prophets, and ultimately what? You know, the biggest form of identity theft, you know, changing the Most High and his son into so-called white man, you know? And this is what this devil has done and continue to do to this very day, man, because what? The world is ruled by the wicked, man. You know, as I mentioned, the three classifications of men, you got the sons of God, the Israelites, the sons of men, you know, the other nations, you got the sons of the wicked, which are the Edomites, which is the self-proclaimed white man, you know, because ultimately with his blessing, let's actually grab this real quick. With this man's blessing, he has the power to go around, you know, pillaging, you know, rape, robbing, and murdering, you know, these different things. That's what this devil has ultimately done, man. You know, this is the book of Revelations 6, and I'm gonna start at verse 3. Revelation 6 and 3. And we had opened the second seal. I heard the second beast say, come and see. And there went out another horse that was red. Another horse that was red, you know, preferring to Esau Edom, because if you read Genesis the 25th chapter, it says what? The first came out red all over like a hairy garment, man. Verse 4 again, back at the top, Revelation 6 and 4, it says, and there went out another horse that was red, and power was given to him. Job 9:24, you know, going back to that scripture, man. The earth is given into the hands of the wicked. So ultimately what? Esau Edom was given power, you know, and ultimately a blessing, which is the sword, to do these things, man. Who gave him that blessing, man? You know, the Most High Yahweh. And there went out another horse that was red, and power was given to him that sat thereon to take peace from the earth. And who is currently taking peace from the earth right now as we speak, man? The wicked. Who is the wicked, man? The Edomites, the self-proclaimed white race. You know, these different unrighteous decrees. You know, just look what happened to Venezuela not too long ago, man. They was able to go in, you know, use a hypersonic weapon, you know, to subdue, you know, the military, their soldiers, and ultimately go in there and what, steal the oil and their different resources from Venezuela, man. And this is a worldwide thing that these, devils have been doing ever since, you know, they came into power, man. And just look at the land of Ham, man. How ultimately Esau Edom came and, went into the land of Ham and ultimately took all the resources from the land of Ham, which is the land of Ham was what? The land of Africa. You look at these different lands, it's named by so-called white people, man. You know, and ultimately with the power of the sword, hey, this devil, went throughout these different lands and what, raped, robbed, and murdered the inhabitants of these different lands and taken their natural resources, man. So just going back to the title, if not, where and who is he, man? Because no other nation is doing what this devil is doing, the self-proclaimed white race, man. I'm passing unrighteous decrees, was that Isaiah 10 and 1? Woe unto him that, decree unrighteous decrees. Because with this laws, with these wicked decrees, which is a law, decree means law, going into the law, he's able to, pass unrighteous decrees to ultimately what? To basically push his agenda, man, of wickedness. Revelation 6 and 4, I'm gonna finish it out. And there went out another horse that was red, and the power was given to him that sat thereon to take peace from the earth, and that they shall kill one another. And there was given unto him a great sword. What is that great sword, man? Going back to Genesis the 27th chapter. If I can grab it real quick, because it goes into it in detail. What is that great sword, man? Esau Edom was blessed with the sword, these different weaponry, tanks, missiles, things of that nature. This devil was blessed with those said things. And with this devil being blessed with the sword, he's able to go out to these different lands and ultimately what? Rape, rob, and murder, take the different natural resources from these different lands, man. Let me actually grab this real quick. This is the book of Genesis 27. And let me see. No, it's in here somewhere in Genesis 27. Read down. Bear with me for a second. Yep, Genesis 27 and verse 38. And Esau said unto his father, and Esau said unto his father, hast thou but one blessing, my father? Bless me, even me also, O my father. And Esau lifted up his voice and wept. And Isaac his father answered and said unto him, behold, thy dwelling shall be the fatness of the earth and of the dew of heaven from above. So ultimately Esau Edom was blessed with these different land masses. But as it's going to continue, how ultimately was he going to require these different land masses? And by thy sword shalt thou live, right? As I read in that Revelation 6, man, he was given to him a great sword, man. So with this blessing being a sword, he's able to go out to these different lands and rape, rob, and murder and take the, the different resources of these different lands and acquire, these different lands by the force of the sword, man. Just look what, this devil has done when he got over to the Americas, man, to the Northern Kingdom, man. The invention of the Gatling gun that he did against, that he used against Gad, man. So ultimately what? The Lord blessed this devil with the sword, because nobody has weaponry like Esau Edom, man. That's his blessing. So with the sword, he's able to go out to these different lands, oppress the inhabitants, take the natural resources of these different lands, and nobody can say nothing about it, man. Because the scriptures even says, who can make war with the beast? The Lord just put that one in my mind. Who can make war with the beast? And even going back to the title, if not, where and who is he? This devil, the self-proclaimed white race is going around rape, robbing, robbing, and murder. Nobody is doing it like this devil, man. Ultimately targeting kids, women and children, man. Verse 39, it says, and Isaac his father answered and said unto him, behold, thy dwelling shall be the fatness of the earth and the dew of heaven from above. And by thy sword shalt thou live and shalt serve thy brother. And it shall come to pass when thou shalt have the dominion that thou shalt break his yoke from off thy neck. And Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing wherewith his father blessed him. And Esau said in his heart, the days of mourning for my father are at hand. Then will I slay my brother Jacob. And right, and ever since then, man, this devil, has been, targeting our people, ultimately, targeting our people by the way of the sword, man. And it's nothing new with this devil. Even going back to my title, man, I'm gonna have to keep mentioning it, man. If not, where who is he, man? It's evident that this devil is the one that's doing, doing these different things, man. You know, hey, the Chinese is not doing it. The Japanese is not doing it. The Arabs are not doing it. Who's doing it, man? Except the simple plain white man. Let's actually grab this real quick. I don't know how long this lesson going to be, but hey, the Lord throwing me precepts. Let's actually grab this Micah real quick. Let me see. Grab this Micah. Bear with me for a second. Navigate this 1611 Bible. Yep, this is the book of Micah 2 and verse 1. Woe to them that devise iniquity and work evil upon their beds. When the morning is light, they practice it, because it's in the power of their hand, right? Because you have these devils behind the scenes, formulating these different schemes, how they can perform a new type of wickedness, man. That's what these devils do all day, all night, man. He tried to formulate, some wickedness, behind the scenes, and ultimately, he uses these different wicked laws, as I mentioned in Isaiah 10 and 1, to make these said things come to pass, man, to oppress people, man. Verse 2, and they cover fields and take them by violence, and houses and take them away. So they oppress a man in his house, even a man in his heritage, right? And they cover fields and take them by violence, man. As I read in that Genesis, the 27th chapter, man, how ultimately Isaac, which is YAHAWASHI, ultimately said what? That blessing shall be, the dew of heavens from above. It says, by thy sword shalt thou live. And how is Esau able to do that? By the way of the sword, man. He's able to go throughout these different lands and rape, rob, and murder, and take the inhabitants, of that land, its resources, things like that. Hey, this devil is the one that's doing that, man. Hey, like I mentioned, the Chinese is not doing that. The Japanese is not doing that. The Japhetic nations are not doing that, man. Hey, who's doing that? Who has the power to go around rape, rob, and murder and not be held accountable for it, man? Hey, this devil, man. Because ultimately the Lord gave him the power to do so, man. So that's why he's able to do these, certain things, man. But we're living into a time where this devil, is being put on blast, man, by everybody, beginning with this word, man. And it's a beautiful thing to see. Let's grab this. This is the book of Habakkuk 2 and verse 4. And it reads, behold, his soul which is lifted up, it's not upright in him, but the just shall live by his faith. Right? His soul that's lifted up is not upright in him, man. Hey, this devil is a true devil, man. He has no conscience. All he do is meditate on wickedness, man. And it says, but the just shall live by his faith, right? Talking about the elect, man, because the elect is the only one that's going to live by faith. Yea, also because he transgresses by wine, right? Those philosophies. He is a proud man, neither keepeth at home, who enlargeth his desire as hell, and is deaf, and cannot be satisfied, but gathereth unto him all nations, and heapeth unto him all people. Right? This devil can never be satisfied. So when he steal your natural resources, it's never enough, man. When he steal your natural resource, he want to steal other people's natural resources, man. Hey, just look what happened with Venezuela, right? They stole all, the oil reserves, from Venezuela. He kidnapped the president and his wife, right? And then what happened a little bit after that? The invasion of Iran, with this whole, Greater Israel project, to ultimately what? To acquire, those said territories over there in the so-called Middle East, which is Western Asia, man. Verse 6, shall not all these take up a parable against them, and a taunting proverb against them, and say, woe to him that increaseth that which is not his, how long, and to him that ladeth himself with thick clay. And right, this is another lesson for another day. It says, when it says ladeth himself with thick clay, talking about that heavy debt, man. Ibat yacht, that heavy debt, which America is, what's that, what's that, trillions of dollars in debt, you know. But just to touch upon this part, says, woe to him that increaseth that which is not his, man. And that's what this devil do. He inquires, different things that is not his, man. He's sitting on top of stolen wealth, man. You know, as we speak, man, the elites of this society, which are what's, so-called white people, which are Edomites, beginning with the chief tribe Amalek, which are Edomites, which are so-called white people, right? They're ultimately sitting upon stolen wealth, man. What they stole from the Israelites, man. What they stole from these other nations, man. Because Esau Edom didn't gain things, by himself, man. He stole all these different things, man. Gold, silver, lands, you know, people, starting with the Israelites. And that's how this devil ultimately became rich, man. You know? But let me see if I got anything else. Let me see. Yeah, just to go back to the title, man. If not wearing, who is he, man? Let me see. Because it talks about, hey, the thief coming not but to kill, steal, and destroy, man. Let me see, can I actually grab one more? Close out with that. This is the book of Daniel 8 and verse 24. And his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. And he shall destroy wonderfully, and shall prosper and practice, and shall destroy the mighty and the holy people. And right in this particular verse is talking about Antiochus Epiphanes, but we equate it to Esau Edom as a whole, man. Because this is what this devil is doing to this very day, man. Read that again, verse 24. Daniel 8 and 24 says, and his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. Because ultimately, what? YAHAWASHI gave this devil the power to do what he's doing. Job 9 and 24. And he shall destroy wonderfully, and shall prosper and practice, and shall destroy the mighty and the holy people. Right? Who is the holy people, man? The Israelites. And through this is the point I wanted to get into, verse 25, because, hey, this is what this devil has been doing for the longest. Verse 25, it says, and through his policy, also he shall cause craft to prosper in his hand, and he shall magnify himself in his heart, which is the mind, and by peace shall destroy many. He shall also stand up against the prince of princes, but he shall be broken without hand. It says, by peace shall he destroy many, man. Because as I quoted the scripture before, hey, the thief coming not but to kill, steal, and destroy, man. Because everything this devil will try to throw out there, he might say, have different peace talks and things like that, but it's ultimately, at the end of it, he's going to draw a sword, man. Because it even talks about, I believe it's in the Psalms, because it talks about, it says, though his words were smoother than butter, war was in his heart. This is the MO of the devil, man. This is the characteristics of the devil, man. What happened, with this whole Iran situation, right? They was having, peace talks, and then a little bit after that, man, what did those small hats do, man? Which are the Amalekites, which are Edomites, which are so-called white people? They end up attacking them, man. This is what this devil do, man. Once you at your lowest, he attacks you, man. When you're not on your guard, he attacks you, man. This is what this devil do, man. It says, by peace shall destroy many. He shall stand. He shall also stand against the prince of princes, but he shall be broken without hand. And we know that what Yahweh is going to send his son YAHAWASHI back to take this devil out of power, man. But just to go back to my title, man, where and who is he, man? Because ultimately, hey, why is your food fucked up? Hey, why is the air that you breathe fucked up, man? Why is your body being, weighing down, man? Hey, why is you walking on concrete? Why is, your food is not up to par? Is the Chinese man doing that? Is the Japanese man doing that? No. It's the simple plain white man that's doing that, man. He will be judged for it. What's that? Revelations 11. I believe it's Revelation. Let's actually close out with that. I'm gonna actually grab one more and I'm gonna close out. Because it's evident that this devil is doing that, man. Revelations 11 and 18, I'm close out. Revelations 11 and 18 says, and the nations were angry, and thy wrath is come, In the time of the dead that they should be judged, and that thou shouldest give a reward unto thy servants the prophets, and to the saints and them that fear thy name, small and great, and shouldest destroy them which destroy the earth. And this devil has destroyed everything, man. You look at the cartoon, just type it in on YouTube, the cartoon, just type in the man, and ultimately what it depicts, a Edomite, you know, ultimately what destroying everything, man. And at the end of that cartoon, it shows what they depict it as an alien, but we know it's the angels of Yahawah, BAHASHAM, YAHAWASHI. They show what the angels destroying this man at the end, man. But ultimately, what the Lord is coming back to destroy him, which destroyed the earth, because everything has been destroyed and everything has been altered, man. Because it talks about, you're turning things up, you're turning things upside down shall be esteemed as the potter's clay, man. Everything has been destroyed under this devil, man. Through his witchcraft, through his policies, through his democracy, and ultimately overall by the way of his sword, man. But just something I wanted to get into real quick, hey, Job 9:24 was on my mind, through the spirit, especially that latter half of Job 9:24 says, where and who is he? Because ultimately it's this devil, the sepulchre white race, beginning with these Amalekites, which is the chief tribe of Esau Edom, that's ultimately doing this. With that being said, I hope this lesson was edifying. I want to end up again all praise, honor, glory to Yahawah, BAHASHAM, YAHAWASHI, BAHASHAM, YAHAWASHI. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of great millstone that taught us the truth, and salutations to the hopeful elect that's around the four corners of the globe. Lord, and I hope this lesson was edifying. Till next time, Kwam Yasharallah, Shalom, and the Baba Ball. Until next time, Lord willing.